October 12, 1982. The Great Northern Plain is a sea of mud and mist. A cold, persistent drizzle has been falling for 3 days, turning the exercise grounds into a primordial swamp. For the guardsmen of the Union's premier armored division, this is perfect weather. This is tank weather. They sit inside their steel beasts, 100 T-Series tanks arranged in a perfect regimental spearhead. The air inside smells of diesel, sweat, and wet wool. Through the narrow vision slits, the world is a smear of gray and brown. The company commanders are confident. Their doctrine is a faith, practiced for 40 years on these very plains. The doctrine is simple. It is brutal. It is based on numbers, speed, and shock. And at its heart is a single, inviolable principle: concealment. The tank is a predator, but it is also prey. To survive, it must be able to disappear. The order crackles over the radio net. Execute phase amber. Deploy defensive screen. Forward. 100 engines roar in unison, a sound that shakes the earth itself. The tanks lurch forward, their tracks churning the mud into a thick, clinging paste. Then, another command. Smoke. Now, from launchers welded to their turrets, canisters arc into the sky. They burst with a soft hiss, disgorging thick clouds of white phosphorus smoke. In less than a minute, a wall of impenetrable white vapor, a kilometer long and 50 meters high, rolls across the field. It is a man-made storm front. It is their shield. Behind this screen, they are ghosts. They are invincible. The enemy, the forces of the Alliance participating in this joint observation exercise, has powerful guns and advanced optics. But optics cannot see through solid matter. A telescope is useless in a fog. Their laser rangefinders will reflect off the dense particulate cloud. Their wire-guided missiles will lose their crucial line of sight. The Union tank commanders are smiling. They have practiced this maneuver 1,000 times. They will advance under the cloak of smoke, using their compasses and pre-plotted firing coordinates. When they emerge from the other side, they will be at point-blank range, and the exercise will be over. It is a hammer blow delivered from inside a cloud. The first explosion is a surprise. It is not the dull thud of a blank training round. It is the sharp, violent crack of a live penetrator striking hardened steel. A plume of black smoke erupts from the turret of a tank on the far left flank. Its commander, who had been standing in his open hatch, simply vanishes. Confusion flashes across the radio net. What was that? Ceasefire. Who is using live ammunition? Then a second impact. And a third. A fourth. They are not random. They are precise, methodical hits. Tank after tank is struck on its frontal glacis or turret face, exactly where a gunner would aim. But there are no gunners. There is nothing to aim at. There is only the smoke. Panic begins to curdle the airwaves. We are blind. They are shooting through the smoke. How are they shooting through the smoke? A young lieutenant screams into his microphone, his voice cracking with disbelief. It's impossible. They can't see us. But they can. From the perspective of the Alliance tanks, sitting motionless 1,000 meters away, the scene is not one of confusion. It is a shooting gallery. On their small, green-glowing screens, the Union tanks are not hidden at all. They are brilliant white silhouettes, glowing like lanterns against the cold, gray background of the landscape. The smoke is a translucent veil, a minor inconvenience. The Alliance gunners do not squint through optical sights. They place a digital crosshair over a luminous shape and squeeze a trigger. A computer does the rest. A laser confirms the range in an instant. The ballistic processor calculates the exact elevation and lead required. The gun tube adjusts itself by a fraction of a degree. A jet of fire. A tungsten dart traveling at over a mile per second. An impact. Another glowing shape on the screen winks out, replaced by a flaring nova of heat. Inside the Union command vehicle, parked 5 kilometers behind the line, the regimental commander stares at his tactical map. The icons representing his companies are blinking out one by one. He listens to the screams on the radio, the reports of fire, of bailouts, of catastrophic explosions. He looks out the periscope at the solid wall of white smoke his forces had created, the shield that had become their tomb. The room is a tomb. The exercise is over. In 7 minutes, 32 of the Union's most advanced tanks have been ruled theoretically destroyed. The crews are safe, this time. But the doctrine is dead. The faith is shattered. Something new is on the battlefield. Something that sees in the dark, that sees through walls. And they have no name for it. They have no defense against it. They were profoundly, dangerously, and completely wrong. The initial report from the exercise is buried. It is classified at the highest level and sent to the main armored directorate. The first reaction is denial. The Alliance must have cheated. They must have had observers hidden on the flanks, radioing targeting information. It was a violation of the agreed-upon rules. It was a trick. A formal protest is lodged through diplomatic channels. The Alliance's response is polite, formal, and utterly dismissive. All their forces had remained in the designated observation area. All rules of engagement were followed. The data, they claimed, spoke for itself. So a second exercise is scheduled. This time, there will be no ambiguity. The perimeter is swept for unauthorized personnel by special forces. The airspace above is monitored by dedicated fighter patrols. The radio spectrum is scanned for any clandestine transmissions. The test is sealed in a sterile bubble. The conditions are perfect. The result is identical. The smoke screen goes up. The T-Series tanks advance. And the methodical, impossibly accurate fire begins once more. This time, 41 tanks are eliminated in 9 minutes. The kill rate is even faster. The confidence of the invisible enemy has grown. Now, denial gives way to a cold, creeping dread. This is not a trick. This is a capability. A capability that strikes at the very heart of the Union's military philosophy. For half a century, their power rested on a single, terrifying image. Thousands of tanks pouring across the plains of Europe, a red tide of steel that would overwhelm any defense through sheer mass and momentum. This entire strategy, the foundation of their geopolitical power, depends on the tank. And the tank's survival depends on its ability to maneuver, to use terrain, to hide. Most critically, it depends on the use of smoke. Smoke was the great equalizer. It blinded the sophisticated anti-tank guided missiles of the Alliance. It shielded massed formations from air attack. It was the cloak that allowed the Union's numerically superior but technologically simpler machines to close with their enemy and fight on their own terms. What if that cloak was now gone? What if it was nothing more than a shroud? The question is whispered in the halls of the General Staff. The implications are catastrophic. It means their vast armored formations are not a fist, but a fragile glass jaw. Every war plan, every logistical calculation, every training manual is suddenly obsolete. They have spent trillions of rubles building an army that could be rendered helpless by an enemy it cannot see. The crisis is no longer tactical. It is strategic. It is existential. It threatens the military balance of the entire continent. The Union's conventional deterrent, the threat that holds the Alliance in check, is a bluff. A ghost has invalidated their army. Down on the front lines, where the crews who survive the exercises are billeted, the psychological decay is swift. The official explanation is that they are testing new Alliance targeting computers and the results are being studied. But soldiers talk. The rumors spread from barracks to barracks, from mess hall to motor pool. They give the phenomenon a name. They call it the Vidyashi glass, the seeing eye. Others call it the ghost light. They tell stories of tanks being hit by invisible bolts of lightning, of shells that could turn corners. The mythology grows to fill the vacuum of understanding. Tank commanders who once sat with confident pride in their machines now eye their turrets with suspicion. The smoke launchers, once a source of security, now seem like a cruel joke. A button you press to announce your own funeral. Fear is a corrosive acid. It eats away at morale, at discipline, at the willingness of men to follow orders that seem like a death sentence. The crews are trained to fight an enemy of flesh and blood, of steel and high explosives. They are trained to trust their eyes, their periscopes, their instincts. How do you fight an enemy you cannot see? How do you fight a phantom that plucks your comrades from a wall of smoke, as if it weren't there? The paranoia intensifies. They begin to see threats everywhere. Is it a new kind of radar? A satellite system? Some form of energy weapon they cannot comprehend? The High Command offers no answers, only orders to repeat the exercises with new, futile variations. Use more smoke. Use a different chemical composition. Advance faster. Advance slower. Nothing works. The seeing eye remains undefeated. The ghost on the battlefield continues its silent, methodical slaughter. The Union's armored fist is clenched in fear. The order comes down from the highest echelons of the state. A special commission is formed. It is granted unlimited authority and resources. Its mandate is singular and absolute. Identify the source of the Alliance's new capability. Understand it, counter it, and copy it. The commission is a gathering of the Union's finest minds. Gray-haired marshals from the Armored Directorate, brilliant physicists from the state's secret science cities, grizzled intelligence agents from the Foreign Directorate, and the most experienced tank designers in the nation. They convene in a secure, windowless facility deep within the capital. The air is thick with smoke and urgency. Their first action is to mobilize the evidence. Every scrap of data from the disastrous exercises is collected. They start with the human element. The surviving tank commanders are brought in for debriefing. The men are shaken, their accounts bordering on the hysterical. There was nothing there, one captain repeats, his hands trembling. The smoke was thick. Perfect cover. Then my loader, his head was just gone. The shell came through the turret like it was paper. Another officer, a veteran of desert wars, is furious. They were toying with us. The impacts were too precise. Center mass, every time. No machine can shoot that well. No man can shoot that well into a cloud. The stories are all the same. A moment of absolute security, followed by a violent, inexplicable death from an unseen enemy. The testimony is emotionally powerful, but analytically useless. It tells them what happened, but not how. Next, they turn to the wreckage. Special teams had swarmed the exercise grounds, meticulously collecting every fragment of the destroyed tanks and the Alliance projectiles. The metallurgists work around the clock. Their reports only deepen the mystery. The penetrators that destroyed their tanks are shockingly conventional. They are simple, long-rod projectiles made of a tungsten alloy. There are no guidance systems, no electronics, no explosives. They are, in essence, oversized metal arrows. This finding sends a shockwave through the commission. They had been hoping for a piece of exotic technology, a microchip or a complex sensor head, something they could analyze and reverse engineer. But the weapon itself is mundane. It is a dumb object. This forces a terrifying conclusion. The magic is not in the bullet. The magic is in the aim. The commission's analysts pore over sensor data. They review tapes from their own experimental battlefield radars. They show nothing but noise reflecting from the smoke. They analyze acoustic sensor readings, which show the thunder of tank engines, but offer no precision. They review every frame of high-speed film taken from observation posts. All the cameras show is a wall of white smoke, and then plumes of black fire erupting from within it. The evidence is a collection of negatives. It shows them all the things the Alliance is not using. Interrogations of captured Alliance personnel from unrelated border skirmishes yield nothing. The low-level soldiers and technicians know nothing of a seeing eye. They talk about their standard gunnery training, their optical sights, their laser rangefinders. It is either the greatest act of operational security in military history, or the capability is so new and so secret that only a handful of elite units possess it. The mystery is hardening into a paradox. The Alliance is achieving impossible results with apparently conventional weapons. They are hitting targets they cannot see. They are violating the fundamental laws of optics. The Commission is drowning. The data points in no single direction. Every avenue of investigation leads to a dead end, a contradiction, a wall of pure impossibility. The phantom is leaving no tracks. The human mind abhors a vacuum. Faced with a phenomenon that defies their understanding, the analysts and engineers of the Special Commission do what all men do. They try to fit the impossible into the familiar. They build theories. They construct explanations based not on the evidence they have, but on the world they know. They are wrong. They are profoundly, dangerously, and completely wrong. The first and most prominent theory is born in the Union's advanced radar institutes. The Alliance, they conclude, must have developed a new form of high-frequency, millimeter-wave radar. In theory, such a system could project a beam with a wavelength short enough to penetrate the particulate matter of the smoke screen, reflect off a tank, and return a usable signal. It is a seductive idea. It is grounded in known physics, however advanced. The Commission seizes on this. It is a tangible enemy, a machine. Orders are issued. The Union's own radar designers are tasked with a crash program to develop a prototype. They are given a blank check. The best minds work for months, building massive, power-hungry devices. The results are a dismal failure. The prototypes are enormous, fragile, and require more electricity than a tank's engine could ever produce. To get a clear image through dense smoke, the power required would be so immense it would cook the crew of the emitting tank. The physics works on a blackboard. It does not work on a battlefield. The radar theory is a dead end. The second theory emerges from the weapon design bureaus. The Alliance, this hypothesis goes, has created a smart penetrator. They imagine a shell that is fired blindly into the smoke cloud. In the last moments of its flight, a tiny, terminal guidance system activates. Perhaps a miniature radar or an infrared seeker that scans the area and steers the dart into the nearest target. This explains the precision. This theory triggers a frantic, microscopic search. Wreckage fragments are placed under electron microscopes. They are bombarded with X-rays. They are dissolved in acid. The technicians hunt for any trace of wiring, any silicon chip, any power source, any control surfaces, or guidance fins. They find nothing. The recovered projectiles are inert, solid, perfectly machined slugs of metal. They are as simple as a stone. There is no brain in the bullet. A third school of thought proposes a more systemic solution: data linking. Perhaps the Alliance tanks are not aiming for themselves. A stealthy, high-altitude aircraft or a network of hidden ground sensors is observing the Union tanks from an angle clear of the smoke. This system then transmits the precise coordinates to the firing tank, whose computer lays the gun automatically. It is a plausible theory that accounts for the accuracy. The High Command responds by changing the exercise parameters. The next test is conducted under a blanket of heavy electronic jamming to disrupt any data links. They fly their own fighter patrols in aggressive patterns, daring any observation plane to show itself. They saturate the area with their own radar to blind any enemy systems. The result is unchanged. The methodical destruction continues without pause. The Alliance tanks do not need outside help. The eye is inside the tank. As the logical explanations are exhausted, darker, more desperate theories begin to circulate. Some intelligence analysts, steeped in the world of paranoia and disinformation, speculate about a direct mind-machine interface. They posit that the Alliance has found a way to link a human brain directly to the tank's cannon, allowing a gunner to fire with pure instinct, to feel where the target is. Others whisper about psychic warfare, a possibility officially scorned but never entirely dismissed by the state's more esoteric security organs. All these theories, from the millimeter-wave radar to the telepathic gunner, share a single, fundamental flaw. They are all expressions of the magic bullet fallacy. The Commission is searching for a thing: a new gun, a new shell, a new radar dish. They are looking for a singular piece of hardware that they can isolate, understand, and copy. Their entire industrial and scientific philosophy is based on this principle: stealing or replicating an enemy's gadget. They cannot conceive that the answer is not a new object, but a new way of seeing. They cannot comprehend that the advantage is not a component, but a system. It is a fusion of technologies: optics, cryogenics, microcomputing, and data processing, woven together into something greater than the sum of its parts. They are looking for a phantom in the machine, but the phantom is the machine itself. Based on these flawed conclusions, a series of futile and tragic countermeasures are devised. New smoke canisters are developed, laced with carbon fibers and metallic dust, designed to absorb and scatter radar waves. This new smoke is more expensive, more toxic, and just as useless. Orders are given for tank formations to move in erratic, unpredictable patterns behind the smoke, a tactic that only increases confusion and the risk of collision. They are fighting shadows of their own creation, wrestling with an enemy that exists only in their minds. While the Union's finest minds chased phantoms across the misty plains of Eastern Europe, the answer was being quietly assembled in a very different world. It was a world of clean rooms, not muddy fields. A world of air conditioning, of polo shirts and pocket protectors, of methodical progress measured in microns and milliseconds. The answer was born in the dry heat of a desert laboratory thousands of miles away. The project did not begin as a weapon. It began as a question: how do you own the night? For decades, warfare had been a creature of the sun. At night, armies rested, regrouped, and hid. The Alliance's strategic thinkers saw this as an inefficiency. They wanted to fight in 2 shifts. They wanted the 24-hour battlefield. Early solutions were clumsy. Huge, fragile infrared searchlights were mounted on tanks, but they were like lighting a match in a dark room. They announced your presence to anyone with a simple detector. The first image intensifiers amplified ambient starlight, but they were useless on moonless nights or in deep shadow. They needed something better. They needed to see what the eye could not. They needed to see heat. The core innovation was a sliver of semiconductor material known as mercury-cadmium telluride. This exotic crystal had a unique property. When struck by long-wave infrared radiation, heat, it generated a tiny electrical charge. By arranging thousands of these microscopic detectors into a grid, an array, you could theoretically build a camera that saw thermal energy instead of visible light. The challenges were immense. This material was incredibly difficult to synthesize with the required purity. A single flaw in the crystal lattice could render an entire sensor array useless. Worse, to be sensitive enough to detect the subtle heat differences of a battlefield, the detector had to be supercooled to cryogenic temperatures, just a few degrees above absolute zero. This required a tiny, complex, and utterly reliable refrigeration unit that could withstand the violent shock of a tank's main gun firing. For years, the project languished. The images produced were blurry, flickering mosaics of noise. The coolers failed constantly. The cost of a single working sensor array was more than the cost of the tank it was meant to be installed on. The program was nearly canceled half a dozen times. But a small core of engineers and physicists persisted, driven by a philosophy that was alien to their union counterparts. They were not just building a component. They were building a system. The breakthrough came not from the sensor itself, but from the microchip. The advent of powerful, compact digital processors allowed them to attack the problem from the other side. They could use software to clean up the dirty signal from the sensor. Complex algorithms filtered out the noise, corrected for flawed pixels, and sharpened the contrast. The processor took a chaotic flood of raw thermal data and, 60 times a second, translated it into a crisp, coherent, green and black image. The machine did not crash. It wrote itself. This image was then integrated into a network. It was displayed on a screen directly in front of the gunner. On the same screen, data from a laser rangefinder was projected. A crosswind sensor on the turret roof fed its information into the system. Thermocouples in the gun breech reported the exact temperature of the barrel. All of this information, thermal image, range, wind, temperature, ammunition type, poured into a central ballistic computer no larger than a shoebox. The system made the human gunner not a replacement for the machine, but a director of it. The gunner's job was no longer to be a master of ballistics, estimating lead and drop. His job was to identify a target. He saw a glowing white shape on his screen, a tank. He placed a reticle over it and pressed a button. The laser fired, the range was calculated, and the computer instantly solved the complex physics equation. It told the turret motors exactly how to move. The gun elevated and traversed, automatically applying the correct lead to a moving target. The gunner simply held the crosshairs on the glowing shape and waited for the firing solution indicator to light up. Then he pulled the trigger. It was a computer playing a video game, but the targets were real. It brought a computer to a knife fight. This system is what demystified the smoke. The Union smoke screens were a masterpiece of chemistry, designed to block visible and near-infrared light with maximum efficiency. The tiny particles of phosphorus were opaque to the human eye and to the image intensifiers the Alliance had used in the past. But a tank is a massive heat engine. Its powerful turbine or diesel motor generates immense thermal energy. Its tracks and road wheels heat up from friction. Its cannon glows after firing. Even the crew inside radiates a faint warmth through the steel. To the new thermal imager, a T-series tank sitting behind a smoke screen was not invisible. It was a bonfire in a light mist. The smoke particles, so effective at blocking light, were nearly transparent to the long-wave infrared radiation the tank was emitting. The seeing eye was not magic. It was simply a camera tuned to a different frequency of reality, a reality where smoke was no more an obstacle than a pane of clear glass. The Union had built the perfect shield for a war that was already over. The war in the sun-scorched mountains of the South was a proxy conflict, a brutal testing ground for the weapons and doctrines of the two great powers. It was here that the Union's special forces finally caught their ghost. An Alliance M-Series tank, part of a military aid package to the mountain government, was advancing along a narrow pass when it struck a massive anti-tank mine. The explosion shattered its track and suspension, leaving it crippled and immobile. Under a hail of machine gun fire, its crew bailed out and was evacuated by helicopter, leaving their stricken machine behind. Before Alliance air power could arrive to destroy the sensitive equipment, a team of Union commandos, operating as advisors to the Northern rebels, swarmed the site. They fought off a counterattack, hitched the disabled tank to a heavy transporter, and under the cover of darkness, began the long, treacherous journey to a friendly airbase. Within 48 hours, the 40-ton prize was loaded onto a massive transport plane and flown to a secret city beyond the Ural Mountains, the heart of the Union's military-industrial complex. The nation's top tank designers, electronic specialists, and intelligence analysts were assembled in a vast, sterile hangar. They circled the captured machine like priests examining a holy relic. For weeks, they carefully disassembled it, piece by piece, photographing and documenting every screw, every wire, every circuit board. They were searching for the magic bullet, the radar dish, the exotic weapon they had theorized about for so long. They found none of it. Then, they turned their attention to the gunner's station. They expected to find a complex and beautiful optical periscope, a masterpiece of lenses and prisms from the world's finest glassmakers. Instead, they found a simple rubber eyepiece pointed at a cathode ray tube, a television screen. Puzzled, they rigged a power supply to the tank's electronics. An engineer flipped a switch. The screen flickered to life, bathing the dark hangar in a pale green glow. And on that screen, they saw themselves, not as people, but as ghostly, shimmering white figures. A technician raised his hand, and a white shape on the screen mimicked the movement. Another man held a hot soldering iron, and it flared on the screen like a miniature sun. One of the old marshals, a man who had fought in tanks for 40 years, leaned forward and stared into the eyepiece. He saw the heat signatures of his own engineers, standing in the cold, dark hangar. He understood. The room was silent. It was the silence of a profound and humiliating revelation. The shock was not a single event. It was a cascade of failures, a series of realizations that struck them one after another, each more devastating than the last. The first was technological. They can see heat. It was a simple phrase, but it shattered their entire conception of armored warfare. Every tactic of concealment they had ever devised was useless. The second shock was industrial. They carefully extracted the sensor array, the cryogenic cooler, the processor boards. Their material scientists analyzed the mercury-cadmium telluride detector. They could not replicate its purity. Their microelectronics engineers examined the processors. The density of the circuits, the microscopic precision of the etching, was 5 years ahead of their own state-of-the-art. Their factories could not produce these components, not in quantity, not with any reliability. They could make thousands of simple, rugged tanks. They could not make one of these. The final shock was philosophical. It was the most damning of all. For decades, their doctrine had been obsessed with the tangible: thicker armor, bigger guns, faster engines. They had been trying to build a better sword. The Alliance had built a better eye. They had been engaged in a brute force contest of steel and explosives, while their enemy had quietly changed the rules of the game. The Alliance wasn't just ahead of them in technology, they were ahead of them in thinking. They were solving a different problem. They weren't even playing the same game. A secret, frantic order came down from the very top of the government. The directive was simple, blunt, and born of desperation. Copy it. Screw for screw, the captured thermal site was declared a project of supreme national importance. The best resources of the state were thrown at the problem of replication. It became a national crusade. And it was a catastrophic failure. Their attempts to manufacture the sensor arrays resulted in devices that were mostly blind, with huge clusters of dead pixels. The coolers they built were noisy, unreliable beasts that failed after a few hours of operation. The processors they cloned were slow, generating an image that lagged behind reality by a fatal second or two. The final product, a clumsy, oversized box that barely worked, was a monument to their own industrial inadequacy. They had copied the form, but they could not capture the function. They had built the body, but the ghost refused to inhabit it. The box was empty. The final report of the Special Commission was not a technical document. It was a eulogy. It presented the numbers from hundreds of simulated battles, run on their most advanced computers, now updated with the horrifying truth of the Alliance's capabilities. The scorecard was brutal. On an open battlefield, in broad daylight, the exchange ratio between Union and Alliance tanks was roughly 1-to-1. Their rugged T-Series tanks, produced in vast numbers, could hold their own. But when the simulations were run at night, or in fog, or with the use of smoke, the numbers became a massacre. The ratios shifted to 8, 9, sometimes 10-to-1 in favor of the Alliance. A single company of M-Series tanks could methodically annihilate an entire Union regiment with minimal losses. The fist of the Union Army had an Achilles heel. It could only fight when the sun was shining. Their entire conventional force was a daytime army. This single technological disparity sent a seismic shock through the Union's strategic calculus. It was a symptom of a deeper sickness. The revelation of the seeing eye was not an isolated failure. It was evidence of a systemic rot. The command economy, so effective at mass-producing steel and coal, was utterly incapable of fostering the delicate, interconnected ecosystem of innovation required for the digital age. It could not produce the material science, the software engineering, or the quality control needed to compete. The discovery triggered a frantic, ruinously expensive crash program to close the technology gap. Billions of rubles were diverted from the civilian economy into military research and development. They tried to steal what they could not build, launching aggressive new espionage campaigns. But they were always a step behind, trying to replicate yesterday's technology while the Alliance was already inventing tomorrow's. This desperate spending was another nail in the coffin of their stagnating economy, another stress fracture in the foundations of their empire. The core lesson was one of philosophy. The failure was not in the tank. It was in the system that built the tank. The Union's centralized, top-down structure prized imitation over innovation. It rewarded obedience over creativity. It could command the production of 10,000 identical steel boxes, but it could not nurture the spark of genius in a desert laboratory that could see the world in a new light. It was a system built for the industrial age, suddenly and violently confronted by the information age. The microchip had defeated the smokestack. The legacy of the thermal imager is the modern battlefield. The ability to see heat became the new standard, a non-negotiable requirement for every fighting vehicle, from tanks to helicopters to individual soldiers. The concept of owning the night, once a distant dream, became a tactical reality. Warfare was fundamentally and forever changed. The contest was no longer just about who had the thickest armor or the most powerful gun. It was about who could see the furthest, who could process information the fastest, who could strike first from the darkness. The story of the seeing eye is the story of a technological shock, a moment when one side realized the very laws of war as they understood them had been repealed without their knowledge. It was a quiet revolution, conducted not with a thunderous explosion, but with the silent processing of photons in a supercooled crystal. It proved that the decisive weapon of the new age would not be forged from steel, but etched in silicon. The future of war would be a battle of information, and the first shot had been fired by an enemy who could see in the dark.